Good evening. Welcome to the April 28th, 2026 special Northampton School Committee meeting to interview superintendent candidates. I'm Gina Louise Shara, the
Recording in progress.
And I'll be presiding this evening. This meeting is being held remotely on Zoom pursuant to the modification of the state's open meeting law for the pandemic and in person here at JFK Middle School. And this meeting and all participating will be audio and video recorded. And I'll begin by asking our clerk, Cassie, to please call the roll.
Mayor Shara.
Present.
Member Bartoli.
Here.
Weisenfreund.
Present.
Member Montgomery Tomaclo.
Here.
Member Stein.
Here.
Member Martin.
Here.
Member Mahoney.
Here.
Member Reese.
Here.
Member Jewell.
Here.
Member Sanders Sullivan.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Great, thank you. Before we get started, I just want to make sure that people know that there is a community survey about the superintendent search that's available on Parent Square, and by the end of this meeting, will be on the public schools website, so northamptonschools.org. And that survey closes at noon tomorrow, Wednesday, April 29th. So we'll get started. We want to welcome Annie Hazarlotza. We know you've had a very busy day here in the district, and we hope it was a good one. And we want to thank you for your interest in serving as the superintendent of the Northampton Public Schools and your willingness to be part of this process. We're grateful you're here this evening, and we're going to get started because we are very eager to hear from you. We have a series of 19 questions, and we'll rotate through the committee to ask you them. And we have until about 8 p.m. to spend together on these questions. So before we get started, do you have any questions for us about the process or how it's going to work?
No, I'm excited to be here, and I'm grateful and humbled for the opportunity.
Great. Okay, thank you. So I will lead us off. And our first question is, why are you interested in being the superintendent in Northampton, and what do you know about Northampton and the district?
Okay, thank you for that question. It's funny, I've actually been asked that question multiple times today during focus groups, and so I'll answer it the same way I answered it during the day. Giving you a little bit of background and how that ties into why I want to lead the Northampton Public Schools. I served in a district for 16 years that was a little under 2,000 students with complex challenges, and this particular district drew from a variety of different towns, right? So like Stoughton, Brockton, Mattapan, Hyde Park, so it was very highly diverse. And so when I saw this posting, it kind of took me back there. While it doesn't have similar demographics, it has what I like to call, diversity in multiple other ways. And so when I saw that, I'm like, wow, that's kind of appealing to me. And so the first thing I do is I will visit the town because I like to live in the city that I'm going to be serving. And so I came to Northampton and I visited Northampton. I drove around and it had a college feel, is what I felt. I had dinner in downtown at Fitzwillies, and I had a couple of conversations with some patrons there just to learn a little bit about what are the schools like, And if I can see myself in the community, I thought to myself, okay, it's got some great challenges. While the demographics are not as similar, it just took me back to that important work we did in that prior district where I spent 16 years, and we really, really moved the needle in that district. And I thought, I just saw great possibility. And I know you have the second part of that question is what I've learned about Northampton. Well, I've learned it is not a passive community, but in a good way. I thrive in highly engaged communities. And so, people, I was just at the Family and Community Forum. I got hit with some tough questions, and I like it, right? And when I get hit with tough questions, I'm going to be fully transparent. And so for me, I like when they ask those hard questions because it means they're invested in their community. It also means that they want to be informed because well-informed people make better decisions. And so what I've learned is that it's a highly engaged community. I thrive in those communities. I'm excited to be here, and I'm excited for the opportunity. Thank you for that question.
Thank you. Okay, Member Bartoli.
Thank you. So my question, can you describe your communication style, please? And can you give an example of a time when you needed to communicate difficult news or information to all district stakeholders?
Thank you. So my communication is, and you might hear this often during the interview, is clear, consistent, and transparent. And I also practice the platinum rule of communication. I'll tell you a little bit about that, what that means. The golden rule is, I'm going to communicate with you how I like to be communicated with. But if I like to make phone calls and talk to people on the phone when I communicate, but you're more of someone that likes email, right? You don't have time for a phone conversation. I'm not really, engaging in your preferred method of communication. And so what I like to do is I like to learn what is your preferred method of communication. It's just a small way to demonstrate that I see you, I hear you, I value you, and so I engage in the platinum rule of communication. To a particular incident that occurred where I needed to disseminate some tough news. It happened just this year. We learned in November, and this is happening pretty much across the United States, but we had a shortfall in our state adequacy aid, pretty significant one. And we also had one of the highest health insurance increases, 34.7%. And so I was like, okay, I just started. Now we've got to communicate some pretty tough news. We have a system that I implement in the district, which is how we cascade information. And how we cascade information is vital. And so first and foremost, I never want a board member to find out at a checkout line that this occurred. They need to hear this from me. So the first person I notify is the board, right? This is what happened, this is the why, and then we have a system that how we cascade information. So from there, we go to the cabinet members, and that's the district leadership team. And typically, we'll sit around the table, we'll talk about it, because we also want to anticipate what kinds of questions we might get from principals or staff. We want to make sure that we have common, responses that are fully transparent, but that we're sending the same message. So from there, district leadership, we go to the principals. And it's always a consistent message throughout. It's not a different message to families or to staff or to principals. It's the same message. So board, we do district leadership, we do principals, we do staff, and then we do the community. I have found that is extremely effective in my practice. It's transparent, and it's just the way I operate. Transparency is definitely the best policy. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Member Weisenford.
Welcome again.
Thank you.
Have you created an overall district budget?
Okay, I have. I've done that in a couple of different districts. We start early. We start in September, October, and we bring. I'm a very, and you'll hear this a lot during the interview as well. I break down hierarchy. So when we make decisions, they are inclusive and they are collaborative, even with budget decisions. And so what I did, I'll give you an example of what I did with my recent budget. I didn't yet know we had this budget deficit. However, I knew that things can happen right away, right? So things that unanticipated, right? And what I don't ever want to be is always in firefighter mode. I want to be able to live in a more proactive space. And so in September, we started engaging, and into October, with principals and district leadership on, okay, we're going to start with a zero-based budgeting approach. And what that means is this is a question that I had shared with the Family and Community Forum. What that means is that rather than rolling over all of the line items from one year to the next without really looking at the historical context, right? You might have line items that you really haven't used in multiple years, but you keep rolling them over. Well, we're not doing that anymore. We're going to start with the zero-based budgeting, and we're going to say we're going to justify each expense, right? So if you say you want professional learning for this particular, evidence-based program, what is the data showing? Because we have to make data-driven decisions, right? And then apart from that, what is the intended impact that you want from this particular evidence-based program? And then we go from there. The other thing I do with budgeting, and I did it this year too, and this is again before I knew that there was a shortfall, is we also use a tiered approach. And the tiered approach is this, and this is like a workshop method that I used with the team. We had these post-its on the walls, and we said, okay, Tier 1. Tier 1 is what do we need to keep the district open? Just keep the doors open in compliance does not mean we're going to move it forward, but what do we need just bare minimum in order to operate? That's Tier 1. Tier 2 is what do we need, right, to be in compliance, but then to strengthen instruction? Like what are the types of things that you need in order to strengthen instruction? And then the third tier, right, which is like is the Cadillac version, right? Is like, okay, now we're going to accelerate. We're going to try to accelerate learning. Tier 3 is we're going to not only be in compliance, strengthen instruction, but we're going to accelerate outcomes. And I wanted that to be very plain so that we all had kind of like a common understanding of what that looked like. And then we were hit with the deficit, which was perfect because we had engaged in these activities ahead of time. And I think I might have answered your question.
Right, so there's a second part
Oh,
of this
okay,
question,
I'm sorry.
but you raced forward, and that's great. But the second part of this is, so how did you balance the needs of multiple stakeholders, especially as you described the scarce resources? What was cut? What was protected? And how did you make those decisions transparently? How did equity factor in?
Thank you. So I implement ongoing structures when I enter a district. And what I mean by that is this. I had an amazing mentor that once told me, when you think you have enough people around the table, you don't, right? And so I have an educator advisory council that I have that I implement, and that's not just teachers. That is anyone who has their fingerprints on the success of a child. And it could be a custodian, it could be a cafeteria worker, it could be a paraprofessional. They're all around the table, and I meet with them on a monthly basis. I also have a superintendent student advisory council that I meet on a monthly basis, and these are high schoolers, right? Eventually, I do implement a middle school model, but I start off with the high school. And I'm going to get to the answer to your question. And the other structure that I create is the family and community engagement roundtable. And that depends on, I typically meet every other month, but if we need to increase the cadence, because I know that this community is highly engaged, I'm certainly open to that. Because it's important for people who sit at the table, they need to have a seat at the table to help shape decisions. And that includes budgeting decisions as well. Apart from that, obviously, we meet with principals, and they let me know what their needs are. So when we knew we had this deficit, what are we cutting, what are we protecting, right, essentially? And the first thing we said, okay, we've got to protect direct services to children. We have to protect that. So we're going to first start with, what are the line items, right? And that's really small money, right? But we still have to address the line items. What are the line items that potentially, when we think about staff development, can we move those line items out of the general budget and put them in Title II funds, right? The other thing is, when we talk about social emotional, let's say curriculum, right? Can we take that money that's in the general ledger and put them in the Title IV funds, right, for well-rounded education? And so we look at a variety of ways to be creative on how to reduce those line items, so we're not touching the people, right? The people that have direct contact with the children. Now, in this particular instance, right, and we all know that a lot of our budgets are typically 85% of our budget is personnel and health insurance costs and all that. So in this particular instance, we're like, okay, we are looking at personnel, but we've got to look and see what are we going to do, right? Because we know we're not making, we're not closing opportunity gaps for special education, right? So it wouldn't make sense for us to cut, for example, special education. Is there something that we could, and so what the principals did is they went back to the drawing table and said, okay, what is our data showing that we can cut while not sacrificing what we're making gains on, and also sacrificing educational resources that students need in order for them to meet and access their curriculum. And so we made those hard decisions. And what I loved about the process was that it was very inclusive and collaborative and very transparent.
Thank you. And just a quick follow-up question. So you've talked a lot about your process and the way you think about budgeting and the way you think about how to deal with a constrained budget. But what did you actually end up cutting in that situation where you had a 34% increase in health insurance and reduced state aid?
Yes. We ended up cutting trying to think right now, a library paraprofessional, not the media specialist, but the paraprofessional. We ended up also cutting the general education paraprofessional who had been assisting our Title I interventionist. We also cut, I'm trying to remember too, we also cut, we also cut a guidance administrative assistant, which meant also that the guidance counselor would have to absorb those administrative duties. But again, we use data in those decisions. We needed to make sure that they didn't impact the services to children.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Member Montgomery Tomko.
Welcome back.
Thank you.
What experiences do you have in building a positive team culture in the administrative team?
Thank you. I absolutely love building teams. High-functioning, cohesive teams so that they're all on the same page. What I can tell you in my experience, I have previously, excuse me, in a couple of prior districts, I've redesigned cabinet into a cross-functional team rather than a collection of departments. Because we want to make sure that we share the success. So breaking down those silos essentially, so that our operations director, our finance director, our student services director, our HR director, we're all sitting at the table because all of our work intersects with each other. So that's one. And then first and foremost, I've got to build trust and credibility. That's huge, right? And that takes time. And so building trust is essential in building a strong, cohesive team for them to feel also safe in that space. And secondly, you've got to engage in healthy conflict. And the reason why I say that is when you got that trust in a team and we're making some strategic decisions and we're hashing things out, we've got to be able to push each other. We're all going to have different perspectives, and that's completely normal. It's how we handle that, how we push each other for the betterment of the team. That's essential in building a positive, high-functioning, cohesive team. Let's see. Multiple touch points. So I have standing meetings. So for my cabinet team, I have standing meetings with them on a monthly basis. I'm sorry, weekly basis. We have, again, we all come together to the table. I do not engage in sit and get meetings. I embed professional learning in those meetings because we're always learning together. That's also a great factor for building that strong, positive, trusting team because we're all learning from each other. And the other thing that I do is it's really important to get outside of campus, right? And what I've done in the past is I do these. It might sound simple, but it actually is very helpful, and it really helps to build us because it's nice to get to know each other outside of the campus. So I do these 3 get-togethers, and they're kind of simple. In the fall, I'll host a dinner, and in the winter time, I do this fun Yankee swap at my house where they come together and they come with their spouse, and we kind of get to know each other. We break bread, and then in the fall, I host a cookout. Those times where we get to we're not talking about work. We're just talking about each other's lives. That's powerful. And it's how you really build those relationships and how you move the work together.
Member Stein?
How will you mentor and support the administrators in our district? What are some of the ways you've done this successfully? And what are some mentoring challenges you've had and learned from?
Thank you. So very similar to what I've just mentioned with my particular team, my cabinet team, one of my favorite parts of my job is growing leaders because I look at leaders as the vessel to the teachers, right? If I grow leaders, they're growing the capacity of their educators, and that translates into the students, right, the student outcomes. And so I meet with principals on a monthly basis. Excuse me. I build their capacity. Build trust, that's super important. I want to be able to support them. I had great conversations with your principals today, and I actually shared this in the forum. There's some just beautiful camaraderie is what I noticed, which is actually atypical for new administration, right? Because they're relatively new. What I noticed is that I love that they trust each other to ask each other when they've got, they're in a little bit of a pickle and they need some help. I want them also to feel comfortable contacting the district office, right? When I hear that they're contacting each other, I love that. But I also take it as they should be, are we not, because I look at my job and my district leadership job as supporting schools. I want them to feel comfortable reaching out to me. I want to be able to support them. And so I want to get to the point where I'm at that point with the administrators. And to give you 2 examples, I know I was going to give you one example that was a positive, and I helped them. So there was one administrator who lacked confidence. She had tons of potential, right? Has tons of potential. But she suffered from what's called imposter syndrome, right? Like they just not feeling good enough, not feeling like I'm making the right decision, like pausing on a lot of decisions, right? And it's about having those multiple touch points, empowering that leader, not giving them the answers, right? Because they have to be able to think on their 2 feet. But having that dialogue where I'm saying, well, when they ask me a question and they say, well, I just don't know how to handle this, what would you do? I'm like, well, tell me what you think. I want to know first how you would handle it. And typically when they answer it, it's what I would say. But I want to build that confidence, right? That was a successful mentoring and growth for that particular principal. It took some time, right, because they needed to build that confidence, but it was successful. And I've had one, where it wasn't so successful, and I will share that. And those are really tough, right? Because you want to grow leaders on behalf of children. And so what I learned about this other experience is, I'm a true believer that anyone can grow. I'm a true believer. You have to want to grow, and you have to be self-reflective, right? And if you struggle to self-reflect, that's difficult, right? And so that was a difficult time for me to help, a leader who was having a difficult time self-reflecting. I worked with her because I try my best to grow them because I really do not give up on people. And that was an experience that didn't go as positive as the previous one I mentioned, but I'll end with this. When you're growing, for example, that particular administrator that I was growing and I saw growth, you want to invest in those leaders. When you have administrators that are struggling, you want to be able to support them. And then when you have administrators that are not showing movement, those are direct conversations that we have to have. They're difficult, but they have to be had. And so I hope I answered your question.
Yes, thank you. Just one follow-up.
Of course.
Which is, and this could be in any three of those categories you just mentioned, right? It could be someone who's showing a lot of initiative, someone who might be stuck, or someone who's lacks reflexivity. When there are sort of persistent challenges in any of those cases, like how do you see yourself in terms of being on the ground in the school with them? Yeah.
So whenever I meet with principals on a monthly basis. I go to them. I always go to them because I don't want to take them out of their building. I also hold monthly principal meetings together, right? And these are not, again, I want to also emphasize, these are not sit and get meetings. These are interactive workshop method meetings where we're really engaging in some problems of practice, right? Because we're going to grow our leaders. So I go to them, and even for these principal meetings, we alternate schools, right? So then I'm not taking them out of their schools, they're kind of alternating. And I like to be visible. I'm a very visible superintendent. So kids know me, kids will know who I am, leaders know I'll be there, and it's not because I'm being big brother, it's because I want them to know that when they're in a little bit of a pickle, I'll use that example again, yes, absolutely they should call their colleagues, but I want them to feel comfortable enough to call me too.
Thank you.
Great. Member Martin.
So pivoting a little bit, can you tell me your thoughts about how Northampton should utilize assessment data to guide instruction?
Thank you. So it starts at the classroom level. We've got to use those formative assessments to drive instruction, right? So using, I often call summative assessments, or we'll use the MCAS report. That is what I call the autopsy report. Once we get there, the kids are off to the summer, there's not much we can do, right? So we've got to hold those incremental data cycles in order to progress monitor, intervene early, right, so that they can show growth. And so I would say formative assessments in the classroom, data level teams, student level interventions. At the district level, we're doing, and I'm sure you have this here as well, we use beginning of the year, middle of the year, end of the year. I've used STAR assessments, I've used NEWA, NWEA assessments, but they can't live beautifully in a spreadsheet. We've got to be able to use it, analyze it, and then say, okay, roll up our sleeves and let's get to work on how we're going to plug in those interventions, because that's what we're here for, right? We're really here to change trajectories of children's lives, and that's one way to do it.
Thank you. So following up on that, how would you develop alignment of instruction materials across pre-K through 12?
I love that question. So I did that in a prior school district, and it was K through 12 in this district. But and it's having a subset of teachers, right? Having that team together, vertical team, and using the backward design model. Like, what are the learning progressions that we want, right? And if you have a vision of a learner, you want to make sure that you incorporate those skills and dispositions in that curriculum as well. You want seamless transitions from elementary to middle school, from middle school to high school. You don't want families to feel like they need a passport to get from elementary school to middle school, right? So you've got to have really smooth continuum of services. And so how I would go about that, it would be similar to what I did in a previous school district. We brought teachers together, and it was optional. They would self-select on if they wanted to be part of this. But we needed that vertical articulation, and they needed to hear each other. So a lot of times, I know it was rough at the beginning because I had elementary school teachers saying, why do I need to be here? We're starting at 12th grade. Because we want to know, like, what are the skills and dispositions we want our children or our youth to have by the time they graduate, right? And so I'm like, you need to hear this because that's our goal. We need to know what we want by the time they graduate. And then at the same, when we got to the elementary level, it was like, and I'm a high school teacher, I'm like, you need to hear what the foundation feels like. Because you're going to inherit these children, right? You need to make sure that they have the skills that they need when you eventually get them. And so I often say that when you create a standard-aligned, coherent curriculum, then when we talk about different curriculum resources, like, and I don't know what you have here, but let's say CKLA or iReady, that is an educational resource. That is not the curriculum. The curriculum is something that you build, right, on using the Massachusetts state frameworks, of course, because they give you the framework. And then you have this educational resource that then addresses that curriculum. And that's how I would go about it. It's got to be inclusive. You got to involve lots of people at the table. I strongly believe in that you got to do with people and not do to people.
How did it go since it was a voluntary effort, how did it go with people to come in the different times you've done this in different districts?
They loved it, actually. They did. They were excited. There was a lack of cohesion. Our outcomes were not good. Teachers were highly engaged and invested in the community, and they were excited for the work.
Member Mahoney, could you grab the microphone?
Sure. Hello. Northampton is working to strengthen MTSS across schools. How would you implement it to address the needs of diverse learners?
Thank you. So I think the first thing I would ask is this. I think I might have had this question in the family and community forum too. You might have a beautifully created MTSS framework, but is it living in a binder or is it living in practice, right? So I'd want to know, how are we operationalizing that MTSS? What does Tier 1 instruction look like? I'm sorry, I'm going to put this a little closer. What does Tier 1 look like in the classroom? Are we using multimodal learning? We have different learning styles. Do we have integrated supports for multilingual learners and students with disabilities? Are we scaffolding? That's Tier 1. Scaffolding is Tier 1. Are we using universal design learning, which is student choice? So all of that stuff I'd like to learn. If it's on paper, or is it living in practice in the classrooms, right? And so then once I learn that, I'd like to know, what does teaching and learning look like in the classrooms? And so I conduct instructional walkthroughs. And what that looks like, it's not evaluative. I'm literally just looking like, what does instruction look like? What does student engagement look like? And I go with the principal in the classroom. And the reason why I do that is because, if we look at it's usually a snippet, 10, 15 minutes in the classroom, and then we walk out. And if a principal's like, wow, that was a train wreck, I'm like, wow, I thought she hit it out of the park. I'm like, there were like not, so we've got to be able to calibrate. Like, what does good teaching look like? And so MTSS, and then once we know that it's on paper and it's great, how are we operationalizing it in the classroom? And can we calibrate so that we both are on the same page as far as good teaching?
Thank you.
Yeah.
How have you developed district-wide capacity to assess, analyze, and monitor student performance? And what other ways have you used student results to create policy and detect and address inequity?
That's similar to the previous question, but I think the previous question might have drilled down to like classroom, like driving instruction in the classroom, and this is really like district-wide, so what are we doing district-wide? And I might have touched upon that in the previous question, but it's really having those district-wide assessments. I want to know, like, where are we meeting the mark on those standards? Which standards are we not meeting the mark, right? And so, again, it's that beginning of the year, middle of the year, end of the year, and the real work is in between, right? That we've got to, where are the skill gaps, and what are we doing with that? And so using that data in the classroom, I mentioned the data level teams, and you had mentioned equity. You've got to be able to disaggregate that data. You've got to know, like, what are we, where are the disparities, right? I often say, you know, if you've got children who, actually, I'll use this. If you got this child right here, and this child is right behind, right, and they're running at the same pace, 5 miles per hour, well, this one's never going to be able to catch up, right? So how are we accelerating learning for this particular child? So I want to know when we disaggregate the data, what does it look like? What do our students with disabilities look like? What does their data look like? What do our students of color look like? What are our multilingual learners looking like? And what are the supports we have in place for them? And that's how I would view the equity piece of it.
Hi. Okay, so this is a question about collective bargaining. What are your experiences with collective bargaining? And please describe how you've navigated a moment of tension with a union on something that mattered educationally.
Yes, that is great. So I worked in Worcester, and I was heavily involved in their teacher negotiations, and I also I oversaw nursing in Worcester too, and we had just engaged the following year in our nursing. We had, I say we like I'm still there, but Worcester has 70 nurses, so it was negotiating that contract. So I do have experience negotiating contracts. In terms of how I communicate with you've got to have open lines of communication at all times, and you have to be transparent with the union. How I like to engage with union leaders is I have standing meetings with them. So in Worcester, we had, and it's not just me, it's cabinet members. So we have union leaders, and typically, you know, in Worcester, there are two school committee meetings per month. And so I would cabinet members would meet with union leaders twice a month. And it's to go over the agenda items. We want to make sure that they're clear, you know, if members have a question on what that looks like. And also if any issues are bubbling up, like we want to know. And it's really important for us to have different voices around the table. When I say different voices, it's the cabinet members, right? Because if it's an issue regarding special education, well, I've got the special education director right there, right? So they should be able to hear what's bubbling up, right? And so open lines of communication, complete transparency, and certainly increasing the cadence of meeting if that's what the need is, or scaling back. In my 3 districts, that's the method I've used, and it's worked very well. I've developed very strong relations with the unions. And there was one part which is the sticking point there was a sticking point on one particular union. I'm trying to remember if it was not Worcester, I think it was another district. But the one thing was, at the beginning of the contract, we want to be able to have district time. And the reason why we want district time is we want, typically we have this like, rah, we bring everybody together, hey, welcome back to school, and it's typically, 2 hour, whatever it is. And so the teachers they really wanted their time at the beginning of the school year. And I was a teacher, I get it. I want to set up my classroom, I've got to get ready, And I'm type A personality. I'm making sure that everything's on point. And so I thought, there was another day that they had during the school year. And so I thought, well, why don't we just move that day into the front so that they have 2 days, right? So they have 1 day at the front where they're doing, it's all them. It's 100%, self-directed. They're preparing their classroom, they're preparing their lesson plans. And then the other day, we kind of have like, 40%, 25% district-led. And so that was something that was a compromise. It worked, and they loved it. And so that's an example of how you work with unions and in the best interest of district. And I'm a true believer, it's not staff or students. It's staff and students, and that can happen.
So this is a long one with 3 questions.
Okay.
All of our candidates say they value diversity, equity, inclusion, and anti-racist and anti-bias culture. How do these values show up in your work and accomplishments? How have you specifically worked to support students and staff of color? And how have you worked specifically to support students and staff who are LGBTQIA?
I love that question. It's really funny, I've been asking the same questions I've been asked also in the family and community. DEI is deeply personal to me. I grew up as an English language learner. I know what it feels like to prove your belonging. I know what it feels like to be treated differently because I don't speak the language. Because I walk the halls and Cubans tend to be a little bit loud, and so I also know what it feels like to have to conform. And I can tell you, I don't want any child to have to conform. Every child belongs just the way they are. And I think my lived experience translates in the work that I do. And I'll give you some concrete examples on that. In a previous district, this is a district that was 80% students of color, and staff was 95% white. And so it was there for a lot of time. And, children didn't feel seen. They didn't feel like they belonged. And I've been there, right? So I understood. And so what we did was we developed two groups. We developed a boys to men group for our brown and black boys. And then we had a Sisters to Sisters group that I led with two amazing ladies. It was once a week. It was an advisory period. It was a good amount of time where we could really talk about let's have those conversations, those hard conversations about when have you felt excluded? What did that make you? How did that make you feel? It was a really safe space for them to talk about it. And we all shared our experiences. And it was during the time that we were doing some racist work in that particular district. And during that time, we ended up forming an affinity group, which is fabulous because then we got the adults together doing the same thing. I totally believe we need strong induction programs, mentoring programs. We need, onboarding, a strong onboarding, right? We need that for the success of a brand new teacher who comes on. But that's not what's going to keep them, right? And so what's going to keep them is the conditions. What kinds of conditions are we setting for our teachers that won't drive them away? And for our staff of color, our teachers of color, when they feel seen and valued, for this particular community, those teachers felt like they belonged. They had a space where they belonged, right? They had then allies who then wanted to have a group, right, to come and say, hey, we support you. And so when those staff of color feel like they feel seen, they feel heard, they belong, they stay and they bring others with them. And so that's how I've dealt with it from my learning experience and also how I've, I guess I can say, operationalized that in my work. I think I've answered all of the questions in that, I believe.
I guess.
Thank you.
Okay, back to me. Have you dealt with bullying in your district, both on the policy and implementation level? And what is your experience with restorative practices, and how would you support district-wide implementation?
I love that work. Absolutely love it. So yes, I have experience. I was hired in Worcester as the Chief Academic Support Officer. So at the time, just to give you a little bit of context, at the time there was a new superintendent who had taken, Worcester's very large as you know, had taken the teaching and learning division and kind of split it in two. So you had one side of the house that was general education, and then she created the academic supports division, which I led as the Chief Academic Support Officer, and I was, in that part of the house is the barriers that interfere with the child's ability to access their learning. So I oversaw special education, I oversaw social emotional learning, I oversaw nursing for medically fragile children. I oversaw our family and community engagement division because that could be a barrier too with families. I oversaw discipline across all 50 schools. And so when I first started, we had a positive youth development director there. And when I first started, what I learned through my listening sessions with people is that the restorative, and I'm fully trained on restorative practices, it was, happening in pockets, right? You had pockets of restorative practices, but there was no fidelity of that being implemented. And so, and there was we had very high suspension rate in Worcester, one of the highest, and we had a bullying epidemic as well. And so we can't be implementing everything across 50 schools because that would be crazy. So what we did was we want to start small. I always say go slow to go far. We want to be able to go far. And so I wanted schools to be able to volunteer and say, we're implementing restorative practices. I like to invest in train the trainer model because that way you don't have these consultants where you're paying a lot of money. You train your own people, you invest in your people. And the other thing is that we also wanted to know if there were schools that were interested in also piloting, because of the bullying epidemic, a new, very restorative in nature bullying intervention that's called Undercover Anti-Bullying Team Approach. It started in New Zealand, and it's had great success. And so there were, Worcester is it's quadrants, right? So it's about 12, 13 schools in each quadrant. And we're saying, if we can get one school in each quadrant, like we're going to start small. Because the way I look at it is, if the other schools start seeing that they're making an impact and that they're advancing, they're going to be like, I want to jump on that bandwagon. And so we ended up having 6 schools actually pilot these 2 programs. So I have experience implementing it. This particular district, and actually another district, also had not yet implemented the alternatives to suspensions that came out in 2021, so we had to also embark on that work. And that's a mandate, so we had to do that, which is also an element of restorative practices. So that element we had to make sure that we were in compliance there. And so I've done that work in 3 of my districts, and I'm very familiar, and it brings me joy because I often say empathy is a learned behavior. And so when we talk about bullying, we have to protect, obviously, the victim, and we also have to reteach behaviors because we want to make sure that children are making more responsible decisions moving forward, and teaching that child the impact of the harm, so that they learn the empathy.
Thank you. Okay, Member Bartoli.
Thank you. So our community is discussing screen time in school, the need to teach technology standards and safety, and how to address concerns about the future of AI. Please share your perspective.
So I remember back in, I think it was like 2022, we were all sitting around the table, and we were like, AI is the future. I'm like, well, we're here now. This is it. We're in it. And we were talking then how we had to really embrace it. We've got to embrace it. And we have to also be able to teach responsibility. It's very, very important. An example I'll give you, and I might be dating myself, but there used to be advanced calculators that you couldn't use. It's a shortcut. You can't use advanced calculators. They're cheating, right? And now you can't live without it because it's really not replacing your thinking. It's enhancing your thinking. And so I think of AI the same way. I'll give you an example. I might do a brain dump. I'm like, okay, I need some cohesion on my thoughts. This is what I'm thinking, and I do a brain dump. And then it kind of puts it all, it's all jumbled up, but it kind of puts it in where I could actually articulate it cohesively. And so if we're able to use it and teach our youth how to use it responsibly with integrity, it's a very useful tool, and I think it's something that we should embrace. And I use the term bounded autonomy, right? We want to make sure that we engage in some autonomy because we want to give them autonomy, but it's got to be some limits, and for them to use it responsibly.
Thank you. And I'm going to ask a follow-up. I'm wondering if you can elaborate regarding screen time and then also teaching technology standards and safety.
Thank you. So there's got to be a balance. There's no doubt about it. I've walked into classrooms where the children are on their screens, and I'll stick around. Typically, I'd like to stick around just to see, how long are we on the screens, If they're on the screens more than 10, 15 minutes, it's too long. And so, because what we want to do is, you want to be able to, when we think about the social emotional competencies, you want to be able to strengthen those. And the way you strengthen those is through peer interaction, interpersonal skills, engaging in conflict, being self-aware. And how you do that is engaging with your peers and learning from your peers and generating your own learning. So a healthy balance is vital.
Thank you.
Member Weisenfeld?
What strategies and considerations will you use to help us implement our upcoming likely state-mandated bell-to-bell phone ban?
Thank you. So I've only been in New Hampshire a little under 2 years. Most of my career has been in Massachusetts. I've been here 18 years in Massachusetts. But coincidentally, New Hampshire just implemented their mandate this year. So we're actually living it right now. So what's really important is this. Now, I do have experience developing cell phone policies. We did this in Worcester with our youth input, right? Because we know that when we have student input, they will hold each other accountable to it. So I've experienced in developing a cell phone policy that includes voices. From educators, too. It's imperative that we include educators because they're going to be enforcing that as well. But what we learned about the cell phone ban in New Hampshire, because I'm thinking, this is not going to be good. I'm thinking this is going to be like, it's going to go south fast, is what I was thinking, right? Because these children, as you all know, it's almost like part of their limb. And so, or limb, I should say. And so, what I've learned, I was really taken aback by, is that it wasn't so bad. And I think the reason, a couple of reasons, is that first you've got to tell them the why. You've got to be able to articulate the why. Why are we doing this, right? The why is very important. And secondly, when they know, for some reason, when they know, listen, this is a state mandate now. This is something that we've got to implement and we have to make sure we adhere to. We've got to be in compliance, you know? They in my experience, what I'm experiencing in New Hampshire, they really take it seriously. Now, that coupled with the fact that we met with them, we were very transparent with them. We, gave them the why. They had tons of questions, but we gave them the why. That helped. And you always have the outliers that are going to push those boundaries, and that's normal. But it's also important that we're consistent on what we say we're going to do. So if we say, okay, if your cell phone is out, this is going to be what's going to happen, and that we stick to it. So my experience, I've had experience creating a cell phone policy in Worcester, actually, and then I have experience in New Hampshire with a state mandate across all schools.
Mm-hmm, thank you. And just a brief follow-up. So you said that you elicited student input.
Yes.
What ages of students?
High school.
And what is your view on having the policy be adjusted for older students?
Oh, I see what you're saying. So a couple of things. So for the high school, what they decided was, they wanted to be able to use it for academic purposes only, because we wanted to make sure they had youth voice. And this was at the high school level. And the middle school was a little bit different. We did actually adjust because it had to be developmentally appropriate, essentially. And so for the high school, they felt like we're almost in college, like we're heading to college. Like you've got to trust us with this cell phone. And we said, you know what? You're right. We should trust you. And so we gave them the trust. And I'm vaguely remembering the cell phone policy, but essentially it was you keep it in your backpack. It does not come out unless the teacher in the room says we're going to use your phone for Kahoot or anything that's educational in purpose. In another school district, I'll mention very briefly, and I had forgotten to mention, we did something similar, and the students again decided that they wanted to use we use caddies, right? And so what we did was like period to period, not bell to bell, right? But period to period. So the moment they walked into a classroom, they slid their phones in a caddy. They did not use them for any purpose, and that worked. They loved it, and it was almost like out of sight, out of mind. They didn't have it in front of them, so they actually sometimes forgot their phone in the caddy. They'd go to the next class, and they forgot their phone in the caddy. They had to come back. So definitely experience with it, and to your point, it does have to be developmentally appropriate.
Thank you.
Member Montgomery Thomas.
Hi, so first I actually have a clarification question from Member Reese's question. Hers was about the district-wide capacity to assess, analyze, and monitor student performance. You talked about how you use the data, but you didn't actually hear you mention how you develop district-wide capacity. So could you tell me some tools or programs that you implemented to assess district-wide student learning?
Sure. So we have to start small. And so how we start is at the classroom level. And so principals actually work with their teachers on how to drive, use data to drive instruction. So I mentioned formative assessments. And so it's principals working with their teachers on how you've got to implement formative assessments often. Again, because you don't want that summative assessment to be the autopsy report. And so at the granular level, it's the principal working, and it could be also an instructional coach if we have instructional coaches here, right? It's working with the teacher on how to use that data. So what we don't want is teachers, students taking a test, and the test is then put on, depending on what you have for a student database, Infinite Campus or Power School, putting that grade and that's it, it's all done. No, you got to use that data, right? You got to provide feedback to the student, give them constructive feedback, and then use that data. So at the granular level, you want the principal building the capacity of the teachers. And then you also want the data level teams, because then you want the horizontal teams where they come together and say, okay, what are you all seeing? Are you seeing that they didn't get this particular standard? Are you seeing the same thing? And how are you reteaching it? So you have to have those conversations, whether that's PLCs or data level teams as well. And then you kind of like widen it out, right? And you say, okay, now we're not just doing grade level teams, now we're going to do school-wide. And again, this is the principal doing this, and I'm certainly happy to build the capacity of our principals. And so now it's not just grade level, now we're going to do vertical teams. What are we seeing vertically, right? So we want to make sure that our second graders, by the time they get to third grade, have those skills and dispositions, and they're ready for third grade. Where are the gaps? What are the skill gaps that we're seeing? And so that is at the school site-based level, and then we just scale that out all throughout. So everyone, we want consistency across all the schools, right? We want to make sure that they're following that with fidelity, right? That we're building the capacity of our teachers, that our principals, we're building I'm sorry, I speak really fast. We're building the capacity of our principals as well. And then at the district level, once we have that, because we can't start at the district level. That's not how we do it. We got to start at the classroom level. And then we say, okay, now we're all trained. Now we're going to implement these, beginning of the year, middle of the year, end of year, and then we're going to go in and show you how we use that data. Like, what does that look like?
Thank you. Now, walk us through how you will build relationships as you become part of our community. How have you bridged conflicts and divides within a school community?
Thank you. Just writing so I don't forget. So the first thing I do when I enter a community is I hold a listening and learning tour. And so what that entails is I hold educator forums at each school. They're optional, they're after school. I want to learn from them. What's going well? What are the challenges? Apart from that, I also want to listen to our youth. Like they know what's getting in the way. I want to know what's getting in the way of their learning. And then I have 2 family and community engagement forums, one in the morning and one in the evening. I want to provide accessibility so that anyone can really join in. And I want to learn from our families. And this is not just families. These are also community members that may not have students in schools, but I want to learn from them. What are they feeling? And so that's in my listening and learning tour. Apart from the 100-day plan, which I had provided you a copy of that's going to be looking at document review, quantitative data. And then it's creating those ongoing structures. I don't believe in one-time forums. I don't believe in passive communication. I believe in two-way dialogue. And what that means is this. I'm going to have the Educator Advisory Council that I mentioned. And as far as community relationships, I want to have a family and community engagement roundtable. I've done that in my 3 prior districts. And I've had great success with that. Especially in highly engaged communities, they've got a lot to say and I want to hear from them. And the other piece that I also implement, because sometimes, and I'm really big on accessibility for families. And so the other thing is I know some families are like, I don't know if I want to go to the auditorium or to the community room and it feels like a formal meeting, right? And so I've done fireside chats too, and that's just at local establishments. I've done it at a restaurant. It's very informal. There's no podium. There's no agenda. It's really a conversation. And so and anyone even at the restaurant that didn't know about it, they can join in. And so I love that because it breaks down hierarchy. It humanizes district leadership. It's just a great way to get to know each other. And the other thing that you got to do is you got to be consistent. These are not one time. Like you can't just do this one time. These have to be ongoing structure. So I do 2 fireside chats a year, and then depending on the family and community engagement, I typically do every other month. But I certainly, like I had mentioned, I would not be opposed to holding them every month. I love that stuff. I mean, and when they start seeing that their input is really helping shape decisions, that's how you build trust, because you're following through on your commitments.
Member Stein?
What is your experience with special education? How can Northampton address special education gaps and build on existing supports, especially with concerns around transparency and trust? And if you're familiar with our recent outside reports regarding our particular challenges and could tailor your answer, great. If not, just in general is fine.
I had this similar question also in the Family and Community Forum. This is great. So special education is near and dear to my heart. I'll share this personal story with you. A lot of people think it's because I have a daughter with special needs, and I don't. I have a 27-year-old daughter that probably could have taught herself. I was that special needs child when I was young. And so, I had, which you wouldn't know it now, but I had a significant speech impediment. And in my culture, because they didn't know that special education was really a resource. It was like, no, we don't want that for my child, And so typically when, you have a child who is unable to communicate, you have that coupled with some social emotional challenges, right? So, I can't communicate, right? Because what was happening was my brain was working a lot faster than my speech, and I couldn't communicate. And so when I see what I went through, and then I see teachers that really believed in me and helped me, they changed the trajectory of my life. And so that's why and I don't often share that story, but it's really important for people to know that it's near and dear to my heart, because I didn't receive services, but I had people who believed in me and helped me through it. And so to answer your question, it's first and foremost, and I mentioned this in the community forum, it's got to be in compliance. That is the floor to growth. It is not the ceiling to growth. First and foremost, we have to be in compliance. We're required to be in compliance. And so the other piece is, you mentioned the report. And this is also a question that I was asked before. And what I'll say is this, and I'll preface it with the following. If I'm solely basing it on the report, right? Because you really have to have conversations with people in order to assess what's going on in special education, and how are you going to close opportunity gaps, and how are you going to advance educational outcomes, and how are you going to build trust, right? I want to be able to speak to people, but if I'm looking at that solely and just giving you my feedback on that, what I'm saying is, like, in my opinion, we're using special education as an intervention. That's what's happening, right? And so I want to see, like, again, what does that MTSS look like? Is it just living in a beautiful binder, or is it living in practice? And because my feeling is that we are, from the report, and I'm going by the report only, right? We're seeing, which is very atypical, to have students identified later in schooling, right? Typically, it's the other way around, right? They're identified early because you close the gaps, and when they're young, and then as you get older, you are building those foundations, and you're building their skills and disposition. So by the time they get to high school, you're really weaning them off of that IEP, getting them ready for post-secondary. And so how I build trust with the special education community, it's clear, transparent, and consistent messaging. And that's what I keep saying, right? You've got to be that, and you got to follow through on your commitments. They have to be able to trust you, and how they trust you is by following through on what you're going to say. I have developed amazing relationships with special education families. They trust me because I follow through on my commitments. And I don't know if there was a second part to your question, but
Partly, yes. So part of it was build on existing supports, but what you may know about the existing supports from the things is hard to, it's hard for,
right,
from the outside. So I guess I might just have a follow-up. I think you're right to pick up on that thread from the report. It's, yes. In addition, we until recently, we didn't have a legally compliant child find policy. It's unclear if we have practices that are in accordance with that. We don't have an MTSS strategy, et cetera. Given the report in these pieces, how would you go about evaluating those elements? I appreciate this. I got to read it before we started, but I'm just wondering if you could speak more about, like, trying to get your hands around these, because they have a long tail, and they're legally written down obligations we have to students, and it's interrelated, as you say, like, how would you begin to get your hands around the particularities here?
Yeah, so through my listening and learning tour, document review, having conversations with special education director and teachers, what are the systems we have in place? We've got to have systems in place. What do they look like? If they live in your head, that's not a system, right? It's got to be formalized and it's got to be on paper. And I say that because, if, for example, our systems are in our, one of our directors' heads, right? And that director wins a lottery and is peace out, right? How are we going to continue those practices if they're living in someone's head? So we have to make sure that those systems are formalized and on paper so that they live beyond any leader. And so I would say I'd have to learn a bit of what the systems we have in place, and then if we don't have any systems, we roll up our sleeves and we get those systems built.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course.
Okay, Member Martin. Mike, please.
Yep, thank you. I think you've addressed some of this before, but maybe you can think about if there's anything to add in terms of what is your vision for this highly engaged district, and how would you go about achieving that vision with long and short-term strategies?
Well, I want every child, because all means all, to thrive. And I want every educator to feel a strong sense of purpose. I want them to feel inspired and hopeful for the future. I want to create a culture that doesn't drive educators away. I want them to feel like their work is valued, that they are valued. And how I would do that, short-term, long-term, right? So I know we talked a little bit about the short-term, the MTSS, the integrated supports, making sure that we're integrating those supports for multilingual learners and special education students. Long-term is that, I think I did answer that in a prior question. It's about developing a coherent, standards-aligned curriculum, K through 12. Right? You got to have a continuum of services. That's essential. You got to build the capacity of our people. We have to invest in our people and build their capacity. And you've got to create a culture of continuous learning and improvement. There's always something to learn and improve on, and we shouldn't pause. We should always be improving.
Hey, Member Mahoney.
How do you see your role in relationship to the school committee? Can you give us examples of how you have communicated with, supported, and collaborated with a school committee?
Thank you. So first and foremost, the school committee sets the direction and the superintendent executes. So I call it the what and how, right? So you say, for example, all right, Annie, I need you to begin, advancing educational outcomes. I need you to begin closing opportunity gaps. And so the superintendent develops the how. How are we going to do that? And so that's me, my team, How I keep the school committee informed? Oh, a variety of ways. Because again, I never want you to find out at a checkout line, wow, the high school was evacuated because of a gas smell. Like, you don't want to find out that way. And so there are a couple of different things the systems that I have in place for that. One is an automatic email that goes out when that happens, right? So that can't wait for, I do a weekly newsletter to the school committee, but that can't wait until Friday when that newsletter comes in. So if that occurs, you're going to get an automatic email that is sent by my executive assistant, which essentially says, hey, there was an evacuation so that you know. Then I also have one-to-one meetings with board members, and these are optional, but they're very valuable, right? I want to learn from you. I want us to build a really, really strong, positive relationship, and those monthly one-to-one meetings are very powerful. And and just so everyone knows, it is the same agenda I have with everyone. It's not a different agenda for each school committee member. We follow the same agenda that I have, and if you also bring agenda items to the table as well. And the last thing is I have what's called it's a What's Happening newsletter, and it goes out every Friday. And that is, and it's a couple of different things. There are high-level updates on HR, teaching and learning, finance, and then I have two hallmarks in the newsletter, which is culture of collaboration and culture of continuous learning and improvement. Because what I do that, I am very intentional about that, is I want to show you how am I creating a culture of collaboration, right? You've got to hold me accountable to that. If I'm saying I'm going to do that, you've got to hold me accountable to that. And how am I engaging in a culture of continuous learning and improvement? And so it's like a pretty lengthy newsletter, but it's very informative. And I do that to keep you informed because I don't ever want you to feel blindsided or surprised. And I think all of those different ways in communicating is how we really create a strong governance body and relationship with the superintendent.
Thank you.
Is there anything else that you'd like to share with us about yourself that we haven't asked you yet today?
Okay, well, maybe a couple of things. Let's see. I'll start with this. I am an extremely authentic leader. I am the same person in every room that I walk in. I don't have a different agenda and depending on who I'm speaking to or which room I'm in. What you see is what you get. This is just how I am. So I'm a very, very authentic leader and very, very transparent. I want to make sure that that is something that you take away from tonight. And the second thing is this. I know you all have looked me up and you know what's going on. So I may not want to end with this, but I have been fighting a long time for the release of my investigative report through 91A. I want you to know that it was finally released on April 13th. And I will say that there was a reason why I was fighting for it. And although I can't talk about it, I encourage you all to look at it and to see that, to see what I've always said, which is that if there's one thing I want to be remembered for when I retire, it's my integrity. And I stand by that. And maybe I will end on that note.
Thank you. We want to thank you so much for your time. But before we part, do you have any questions for us or anything you'd like to know?
I have one question. One of the things that I pay close, and I wrote it down so I wouldn't forget. One of the things that I pay close attention to is how a school committee, especially recently, supports its superintendent in leading the work, right? If selected to lead Northampton, how will you support me when I've got to make some challenging and unpopular decisions in the best interest of the district?
Good question. Someone like to respond? Please.
It's like you said, your challenging decisions are almost always our directive. So we can't get the work of the school done without you. And so it's our job to explain it to our constituents and to make sure that even when it is something that's deeply uncomfortable, that they understand the why it happened.
Thank you.
Emerson.
I'm getting some feedback here, so I apologize. I think from my perspective, and this is this is my fifth year now. This is my third superintendent search in that period. I would say where challenges have arisen are in exactly the areas that you pointed out that have fallen apart. So not sort of following the direction of the school committee, not communicating with members, not being transparent with the community, not building trust, right? So I think when those things are done, it makes it very easy to support the work of the superintendent. I think when those things are in misalignment, it makes it very challenging. So I think if you deliver on those elements that you feel are central to how you would approach your work, I don't imagine you would have problem being supported by the body.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
I would expect you would find this school committee would really welcome what you've outlined in terms of communication, both coming from you on a regular basis and the meetings. And I think that kind of open door allows there to be support, because everything's on the table. If we can build that trust with authenticity, then there aren't any surprises, then there can be an alignment in how we move forward through difficult things together.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
kind of echoing what everyone's saying, and also like really honoring and valuing the honesty. So you are a very transparent person. I think as a whole, we are a pretty transparent group of people and clear on our personal goals, but our collective goals as well. And so really working to be aligned together from the start. So we're not just kind of fumbling as we go along.
Thank you.
I would be sure to respect the years of experience that you bring to the job.
Thank you.
Well,
Well, yeah, I also want to echo what my colleagues have said, and in particular, being receptive to your engagement and your recommendation is really important to me as a school committee member. You lead the district. We support you in being that leader by being a sounding board, by being responsive to what you bring to us. It's really important to me.
Thank you.
yeah, good memories.
Echoing quite a bit, but I think if we are given that honesty and transparency, then we can communicate that to our constituents who can in turn support you and support the district. So it empowers us with the information and the access to rally and connect and link up with the community.
I love it. Thank you.
I guess I agree with so much that's been said. I think you talked a lot about communication. And again, I think if the communication is good, then it's not hard. But, and I don't know what, everybody's different in terms of what feels supportive to them. But I could imagine that what might feel supportive is the ability to have real discussions around issues in a, even though we're in a public place together, and it's sometimes a little awkward to do that on Zoom and in front of, however many people, but I think that's something that's important to me as a school committee member, and I would imagine in the role of a superintendent that could feel very supportive to be able to have authentic deliberations together about important issues.
Yeah. Thank you.
I'll just add to that, and I think that is important to be able to have those deliberations, but I would also like us to get to a place, and I think it's about mutual trust, where, we hire a superintendent as the expert in this sort of broad educational field, and to get to a place where we trust their judgment would be really great, and rely on their opinion.
Thank you. Well, thank you so much for the opportunity. Again, humbled and grateful to be here. You've got an amazing community. It's very special.
Thank you again.
Thank you
Thank
so
you so
much.
much for your time. Okay, so we have a break till 8:15. So, yes.
Do we want to start earlier?
I'm not sure that we can because it was posted. Let me check the agenda, but I believe that it's
It didn't
posted.
say the times.
Oh, you're correct. It didn't say. We could start earlier
Great.
if that works with
I'm trying to go off
Dr. Silver. I don't know.
You got it.
But let's
Yeah.
spend a little bit of time and let's move on. for being here. We know that you've had a very busy day here in Northampton and hope that it was a good one. And we want to thank you for your interest in serving as the superintendent of the Northampton Public Schools and your willingness to be part of this process. So we're grateful to have you here this evening, and we'll get started because we're eager to hear from you. We have a series of 19 questions that we will rotate through the committee and ask you, and we have until about 9:45 to spend together. So we'll get started, but do you have any questions for us about the process before we start?
I'm just pulling out a copy of my questions.
Sure.
I think that it's admirable, the work that you've done together to invest in your community, and I appreciate probably some of the personal time that it's taken you to do this work. So thank you very much for being so vested in this work.
Thank you for saying that. Okay, so I will start off and with the question of why are you interested in being the superintendent in Northampton, and what do you know about Northampton and the district?
Ooh, so much to share. So I know that the district is deeply engaged. The community is deeply engaged. The staff are very committed to the schools. I know that it is a fabulous community just to be a part of. I used to vacation here when my kids were small and loved the community. And it's a values-driven community. You care deeply about the rights of the humans that live here and are committed to equity and that work. So I value that. And I also know that in terms of my interest in the role, I think that I have to relax a little bit. But in terms of my interest in, thank you very much. In terms of my interest in the role, I retired after 32 years of service in education, 20 years for PK-12 and 12 years in higher ed. And the year I retired, I was invited back to be superintendent of the Bloomfield schools. So I did that for a year, and we found a great superintendent, and that was, I had been in Bloomfield for 10 years. And so it was wonderful to find the right person for that fit, for that community. And then I took a position at Southern Connecticut State University to teach teachers and other certified staff how to step into a principalship, how to be a strong leader in a school, to evaluate staff, to build systems to support the structures of schools. And that has been very rewarding. They invited me to come to that position after their search failed. And because I had the flexibility, I could do that. So I did. And I learned about the opening in Northampton through some friends. A couple different friends from the area contacted me. And so I looked into it, and as I started to look into it, I thought, you know, there is some work here that I think I could really contribute to. So that's why I'm here. It's a question of fit. I'm not necessarily looking for a title, but I am looking to contribute. And so, and I have, my youngest is 16, so I have about 6 years ahead of me with additional engagement. And I really love the public school setting. And so this is a good community for me. And, or I'm learning that today, how strong of a community it would be for me as a fit, and your opportunity to learn more about me and whether or not I would be a fit for you.
Thank you. Mayor Bartoli.
Thank you. So if you could let me bring the mic closer, please go ahead and describe your communication style, and and after you do that, can you give an example of a time when you needed to communicate difficult news or information to all district stakeholders?
Yes, thank you. So my communication style is clear, plain spoken. It really upsets me when people use acronyms that I don't understand. And the whole point of communication is to help it understanding. So I do try to avoid, you know, those education jargon terms and terminology. So it's plain spoken, it's calm and sequenced. really believe in, there's a sequence of communication. I don't confuse sending information with communicating, because communicating is a two-way process. So I feel that, you can post something on the website, but that's not communicating. You really have to build understanding with people. So a difficult situation was when I was overseeing supplemental education services in Hartford. I was supervising, it was a $21 million grant, and a portion of that entitlement grant is to be used for supplemental education services. At the time it was. And so I was supervising that work, and the person who was running it, we were oversubscribed by $3 million. Hartford Public Schools had, at that time, student enrollment of about 23,000 students. So it was a big program. And when I learned about the situation, I paused services. I also discovered at the same time that our contracts process had not been followed. So our board had not approved the contracts, yet the services had started. So I paused services. I communicated with our administrative team, our superintendent, our chief academic officer, our finance office, and our board through the superintendent. I also communicated with the State Department about the need to pause services. And then we sat down together with a team of us and identified where the gaps were in terms of what the problem was with the oversubscription, put in place criteria for the selection of students to get the tutoring through supplemental education services. And then I met with our community, our English speakers and our Spanish speakers. I also speak Spanish, so that helped me with communicating to a lot of our families about the pause in services while we regrouped and then restarted the program. And we did have record participation that year, but we did not go over budget. And it was really wonderful to pull together with our Spanish-speaking team, especially our, her role was the ombudsman of the district, and she invited me into a radio program that they have, and I was able to respond to questions in Spanish because many of our users, our families, our users, but our families are Spanish-speaking, and so it was great to provide them with that information in the first language. Thank you.
Okay, Member Weisenfreud.
Welcome again. Have you created an overall district budget? And if yes, how did you do that while balancing the needs of multiple stakeholders, especially in times of scarce resources? What was cut, what was protected, and how did you make those decisions transparently? How did equity factor in?
Thank you so much. Thank you for that question. This is really a point of pride for me. In Bloomfield, in 2025, when I stepped in as acting superintendent, our budget process was underway, but our mayor said that she wanted a 0% increase, and our chief financial officer said that we needed an 8% increase. So it was a tough moment. So I pulled together, met with our principals, met with our central office staff, spent a lot of time with our chief financial officer, and came to a point where I could agree with our CFO, our chief financial officer, that a 6% would be the highest we would ask for because we identified some savings. And then taking that 6% to 0%, we created the scenarios stepping from 6 to 5 to 4 to 3 to 1 and 0. And the balancing the cost of those reductions with the impact on our learners. And certainly one of the core priorities of that process was to preserve classroom teachers and to preserve student-facing folks as well. And so we balanced our considerations also for our multilingual learners and the supports really for our special needs, our students with special needs. So what we were able to do is present those scenarios, and we were able to get to a point where we were at 3.19 with not losing any classroom positions or student-facing resources. We did find savings with our transportation. We renegotiated our fuel costs. We also went back to our, what is the name of that? The person that you work with for your benefits to ask for a review of the anticipated cost of the next year's health insurance. And so we were able to negotiate a savings there as well. And I came to the point where the 3.19 was where we would not lose any student-facing resources, and we could take into account those savings, as well as removing some redundancy that we had in central office with staffing. And with those reductions, I worked with our board and said, we really can't go any lower than this 3.19. So that is what our board was able to bring forward to the mayor. And we also met with the finance team at the municipal side to discuss what the needs were and how we were going to, reduce our expenses, but at the same time, what we could not afford to reduce. And so we settled at the 3.19 and moved forward with that.
Yeah, thank you for providing such great detail of that process. And I guess my follow-up would be, what do you think made you successful? What about what you did or how you did it made you successful in that?
Yes, it was very difficult. That negotiation process was difficult. But I think the collaboration, the transparency, I think that transparency and the trust that we had built together, being very willing to open all of our books to our partners on the town side, and the work that our principals did to look at, how can we save money? Where can we reduce costs that don't affect students? So it was a very large, broad community effort. So I can't own that because it belongs to the community.
Thank you.
Member Montgomery Tomaclo.
Thank you. What experiences do you have in building positive team culture in the administrative team?
Thank you. So building a positive administrative culture has to do with clarity, trust, competence, consistency, and shared responsibility for students. I think that morale improves when you are straightforward and clear, and you have high expectations and you hold folks accountable. And you can hold people accountable in many different ways, but from a capacity building standpoint, ensuring that you provide them with the instruction and support that they need so that they can grow their skills. I think probably some of the work that has really helped me build trust and capacity with folks is the work that we've done with our district accountability plan, our data teaming, where we come together as a group and make decisions to move the district forward, and always keeping the student really at the center, and the broad range of student needs that we have, holding them at the center. So what I would want for Northampton is for them to experience a very visible leader in the superintendent. And one of the things that I most loved about my role as superintendent in Bloomfield was going into classrooms and having students mistakenly call me Dr. Seuss instead of Dr. Silver, which was delightful. But knowing students, knowing their names, knowing their experience in our schools, knowing hearing about them in the future, having them come back and share their experiences. So knowing our students, knowing all of our staff members by name, and knowing, just being present and visible in the schools. I think that goes a long way toward building positive team culture and a strong administrative team.
What experiences do you have in building, I'm sorry, you just got that one. We're in the same block here, I apologize. How will you mentor and support the administrators in our district? What are some ways you've done this successfully? And what are some mentoring challenges you've had and learned from?
Thank you. Thank you, and I did really enjoy my visit today with administrators in the district. There's a lot of enthusiasm, there's a lot of value that they have for each other and for the work that they're doing. And for them, I really heard from people who really love their jobs and the work that they're doing. So when someone loves what they're doing, I feel like they show up stronger and they are better equipped to handle challenges and tackle things. So I am, something that I always do is I really want to know the individual administrator's interests in terms of developmentally, where they see themselves on their leadership continuum and where they want to go, so that I can build opportunities for them to follow that vision. I also think that it's important to have learning goals, and so I'm going to ask administrators what their learning goals are, because I'm still learning. I learn every day as a human. I think we are designed to learn. And so I want the administrators to also have the same expectation of themselves that they have for their students and their staff. I want to meet with them one-on-one, have regular school visits, see them in action, watch them be the administrator that they are, so that I can provide them with support and guidance. If someone indicates I'm interested in, earning another college degree, maybe a doctorate, maybe an advanced practical degree, a 6th-year degree, I want to make sure that I'm aware of what their needs are and what their interests are, so I can send them opportunities as they become available. And I've done this, I do it now as a professor of people who are earning their principalship credential, by nurturing their ability to effectively evaluate teaching and learning in a classroom, helping them to design systems in an organization. When you have, this is something I tell my students all the time, when you have issues popping up and it's a pain point for you and it's distracting you from that instructional leadership that you want to engage in the classroom, you need to design a system. It's a message in the chaos to design a system to address what the challenge is. So if you have problems with dismissal, if you have problems with arrival, if you have problems with chronic absenteeism, whatever it is that's causing you a struggle, you need to design a system around that. So I'm helping students, I help my students learn how to do that, and I would anticipate doing the same thing here in Northampton.
And just one follow-up. If you do have examples about some mentoring challenges you've had or learned from,
Oh, yes.
that'd be great. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So I have had situations where I've had to make tough decisions, but to begin with, I didn't realize how entrenched, the situation was. There have been times when I've mentored people and worked with them to identify, what the requirements are of their position and where the gaps are, and provide support for them to close those gaps. And there are other times when I've provided that support and monitored the implementation of those changes, and I have not observed those changes, and I've had to use more stringent disciplinary measures.
Thank you.
Member Martin, when you're ready.
How should Northampton utilize assessment data to guide instruction, and how would you develop alignment of instruction materials across pre-K through 12?
Yes, thank you for that. And assessment is a big part of my career path, and I have been working with assessment data since 2001. Before there were, well, we had early Scantron, I think, at that time. And one of the goals of assessment is really to improve instructional delivery and to understand what the gaps are in your learners. So assessment is not healthy just for the point of assessment, but how it serves the instructional process. That's essential. And I've used assessment data to teach people all kinds of things about the work what's happening in their classroom and what students are understanding and not understanding. For example, I looked at the item level data for Northampton for your MCAS, and I observed that your fourth graders are very strong with inference, but they struggle with constructing a written response. And so I would use that item level data and triangulate it with evidence from the classroom in order to work with the instructional team to identify exactly where in the curriculum, what pieces would be most useful. I'm a firm believer in data teaming, which is when groups of people come together to look at data, because people interpret data differently. When they look at charts and graphs, people just see different things, and it's really helpful to get those different perspectives. Data teaming is something that I don't think that it's in use right now in the district, but you can have every level of data team from classroom grade 2 teachers and grade 3 teachers up through looking at your climate data for your whole school or the whole district. And using that data that aligns with your strategic plan to ask the question, where are we moving forward and where are the gaps and how are we using this information? I also feel that you have a type of software that has dashboards built into it. I know I'll think of it in a minute, but I know I made a note of it today that I was really excited to see this. Because this dashboarding software can be internal for users, but it can also be external for the community. So the community can understand better. It's called Analytic View. Open Architect. Open Architect is a very cool tool. The company is from Massachusetts. They've done a lot of work in Massachusetts, and they have beautiful dashboards. When I was finishing in Hartford, we had contracted with them, and they built out public-facing dashboards for us that communicated critical information like attendance, because if your students aren't coming to school, how can they learn from your amazing teachers, to assessment data and attendance, assessment data, chronic absenteeism, and discipline. So those were core areas that they used that analytic view for. So I think that that's a great opportunity for Northampton to better leverage. Thank you.
Member Mahoney.
Northampton is working to strengthen MTSS across schools. How would you implement it to address the needs of diverse learners?
Thank you. MTSS is multi-tiered systems of support, and that is a program of providing intervention, but it's coupled with tier 1 classroom instruction. There are 3 tiers. Right? Tier 1 is classroom instruction, tier 2 is intervention, and then tier 3 is intensive intervention. And all students should have access to the core academic instruction that happens in the classroom. And that tier 1 instruction should be strong. And effective tier 1 instruction solves a lot of problems. And one of the problems it solves is high referral rates to special education and over-identification of students with special needs, students with qualifying for special education services. So I understand that the rate of identification for students with special needs in Northampton is about 24%, which is, it's 1 in 4 students qualify for special needs. I also observed that in the reports that I read, in the data, that it's an interesting pattern is also seen where students who are older, middle school and high school, are identified as students with special needs. So I know that there is a movement afoot in the district to implement MTSS, but I don't know the scope of, the academic, behavioral, social, emotional pieces of it. I'm not sure exactly where everything is with that and where it's being effective and where it's lagging and needs more support. So I think a thorough review of the MTSS implementation is called for, and that would involve working with the central office team and the school leaders to set up criteria to review, what is the MTSS plan? Let's review what the criteria are, and then let's have a team visit our schools and do a look for, walk through to see where it's strong and where it's not, and then to probably differentiate supports to each school based on where they fall in the observation of the implementation.
Thank you.
Okay, embrace.
How have you developed district-wide capacity to assess and monitor student performance? And what other ways have you used student results, to create policy and detect and address inequity?
Yes, thank you. Yes, so I think I may have mentioned that assessment has played a big role. I always felt that assessment can teach us so much about our learners. And I've worked with district leaders to build routines where we analyze student performance using data teams and also using accountability teams. So our data teams are, they were nested data teams by grade level and by subject area for every school. We had about 900 data team meetings a year. So they were on a regular cadence. It was how we did business, where we looked regularly at student work. Now, we had in Bloomfield 7 schools and about 2,400 students when I first got there. So we put in this program of data teaming. And with that work, I worked with our teachers and administrators to get assessment tools that would really help our classroom instruction and help our teachers. And so we ran RFPs, requests for proposals, in order to find assessment tools that aligned with our state high-stakes assessment. And then we would administer the benchmark assessments 3 times per year. And there were a number of different ways that we used this data to identify where we needed more support in our schools, as well as to ensure that our different groups, like our Latino students or our Black African American students, that our white students, actually in Bloomfield, we had 97% students of color. So it was a smaller group, the white students. But we looked for group differences, and we really looked also at student evidence of student work to triangulate that and to do better, offer stronger instruction. Those data teams also, I'm trying to think, I'm going to organize this. We also had dashboards for our staff, data dashboards that would help them quickly find, where their students were strong and where their students had gaps, so that all of our teachers and our principals could see that data. In addition, with our data team work, that's what I wanted to share with you. Our graduation rate when I came to the district in 2011 was 74%. And by 2015, it was 90%. And then 2016, it was 92%. So we did a lot of work in data teams to really understand what the student challenges were. And once we got, another thing that we worked on was we had a belief our high school faculty had a belief that all the smart kids left and went to magnet schools. So what we did was we created a scatter chart that showed all those every student coming in from 8th grade to 9th grade to the high school, and we gave them different color codes to put them on a graph and show them, how many level 1, level 2, level 3, 4, and 5 students we had. And what they saw revealed to them, they had a belief that we didn't have these kids, and they saw that we did. We had that really high capacity, high capability, very exciting, strongly skilled learner, along with a lot of students who were also struggling. And by identifying them with the faculty and where they were addressing their individual needs, we managed to increase our literacy proficiency in the 2010-11 school profile. That literacy proficiency for our high school students was 9.9%, which was very upsetting. And part of it was the faculty's belief that all the smart kids went somewhere else. So we were able to prove to them that that was not the case. And then we used the NWEA MAP assessments to identify what kids were struggling with. And it was a math teacher we were in a faculty meeting, 75 faculty, looking at a chart that I had provided them. And it was a math teacher who stood up and said, see this kid, and see this kid, and see this kid. He said, they're not failing math because they're bad at math. They're failing math because they can't read. Mm. And it was a powerful moment. And it's moments like that that come out of the faculty themselves that teach us what we need to learn about our students. So we were able to raise now the students are, when they took the SATs in 2016, they had gone from 9.9% to over 30% of students meeting grade level expectations. The test changed, but if you use the grade level expectation metric, and with the Smarter Balance, they actually scored about 65%. So it was an anomalous year. But to go from 10% to 30% is a significant rise in student performance in literacy. So yes, I think that using data it's important to know your data and to understand how you can use it, and that is an area of expertise for me, and I'd be happy to teach other people how to do that.
Member Jewell.
Okay, shifting gears a little bit. This is a question about collective bargaining. So what are your experiences with collective bargaining? And then if you could please describe how you've navigated a moment of tension with a union or something that mattered educationally.
Thank you. Yep. So their collective bargaining units, it's a partnership. We can't operate a school without our teachers, without our paras, without our administrators. We need their partnership in this work and their goodwill. So I begin with respect because these roles are important. These people are incredibly valuable, and besides it being, teaching is really one of the best jobs on earth, but it takes a lot to be a good teacher. And so, I want to approach it with respect because working conditions are learning conditions. So I did in Bloomfield, while I was interim superintendent, I initiated contract negotiations on our teachers' contract, as well as addressing lapsed contracts that we had fallen behind the timeline for renewal. Now I understand here that all of your contracts are renewed at the same time, and it's done collaboratively with your union council, right? Which is a wonderful partnership, really, and it's supportive, and it's a great opportunity for your team, the team that is staffing the schools, to really work collaboratively together and to have transparent interactions when it comes to bargaining. So I think that's very powerful. How did I navigate a moment of tension with a union on something that mattered educationally? I'm sure there's more than one, situation that has come up. Let's see, and I know that I have written MOAs and MOUs, memorandums of understanding, memorandums of agreement, with our unions. One of the things that we had to negotiate was, in addition to the contract, which was intense and, finished at, I think 2:30 in the morning. It was a long negotiation, right? But I compiled all of the MOAs, memorandums of understanding, so that we could be sure to work them into the new contract. But in negotiating one of those MOAs a few years earlier, our teachers wanted release time to score the open-ended items on some of the assessments that we were using. And then, so we negotiated a contract, a memorandum of understanding, to create release time for them so that they could do that. But we also made sure that the scoring of those open-ended items would contribute to the data teaming that they were doing together as grade level units. In addition, because of the amount of time that it took to enter data, it used to be that you had to do it, by hand with those written. So we did negotiate an MOA for that as well. And it was a matter of the union coming to us and saying, this is a problem, and then coming back to us again and saying, it's still a problem and nothing has happened. So sitting down and just going through that process of ensuring that they have the release time to do that work both times. Trying to think if there's something else. No, I haven't. Yeah. Okay.
Member Sainer-Sullivan?
Hi again. So there's 3 questions within this. All of our candidates say they value diversity, equity, inclusion, and an anti-racist and anti-bias culture. How do these values show up in your work and accomplishments? How have you specifically worked to support students and staff of color? And how have you worked specifically to support students and staff who are LGBTQIA?
Yeah, that's an important question. I am a very strong believer that people should be respected regardless. And equity has to show up at all levels of an organization, from the curriculum that you use to ensure that it's representative, and it's very clear that people from different backgrounds, the richness of their culture's contribution to the knowledge that is in the world is integrated and included, and that students see themselves in their curriculum. I have chosen to work in communities where I am not a majority, and I've chosen that path because of the impact I felt I could make. And one situation that I worked on was our English language learner services in Hartford. I was charged with supervising those. So I went out to the schools and I observed what was happening for our English language learners. And we, at the time, had a sending-receiving model. In other words, some schools could send all of their non-English speakers to a nearby school. It's called a sending-receiving model. And what I learned from the community, from the non-English speakers, the multilingual, many of them immigrants, was that their experience of those sending-receiving models was not a positive one. And they really wanted to be able to attend their neighborhood schools. And so I looked at the resources that we had in central office. We had a number of English EL certified staff and TESOL certified staff. And we reorganized our model to distribute those staff to the schools, to make all schools receiving schools, so that no family would be rejected by the neighborhood school. And we had student-based budgeting at the time. And so what that means is that there's a straight increment for every grade level a student is in. There's a certain amount of money that comes out of the budget and goes toward that student. And then if the student was an English learner, or if the student had special needs, or if the student was a free reduced price meal student who qualified for that, there were additional sums or increments that were added to that base student allocation. And we used those allocations for English learners to fund the positions at the schools. So if a school had 40 English learners, we were able to staff it with those funds. So it was responsible budgeting based on directing funds to the need. And that was very satisfying work to me because it opened up our schools to the community that lives around the school. In terms of LGBTQIA+, one of the most exciting policies, and I know policies aren't always exciting, but one of the most exciting policies was our transgender policy that we adopted in Hartford. And anticipating that people might not understand the experience of people who are different from themselves. I worked with our policy committee from our school committee to craft a policy that we then sent it out, distributed it to community, different principals and people to read the policy and come back with any feedback. And when it came time to bring the policy to our Board of Education for a reading, also invited a group from the transgender community to come and speak during public comment about the experience of being a transgender person, and especially the challenges that transgender children have in their early formative years in elementary, middle, and high school, and the power of adult support in their environment and how important that is for the mental health and the ability to care for and cherish yourself just for the unique person that you are. So had wonderful work with them and passed an excellent policy. And another area is climate data, always using climate data as well to understand the impact, disaggregating that data by all kinds of different frames so that we understand how well our students are doing, by groups as well as individually.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Back to me. How have you dealt with bullying in your district, both on the policy and implementation level, and what is your experience with restorative practices, and how would you support district-wide implementation?
Thank you. This is super, because bullying and identity slurs, they are about power. They are about power. They're about power, someone trying to exercise power over someone else by diminishing them. And they're about power, harm, and belonging. And so the district does need to address those individual instances. And to do that, you need a policy, and you need procedures, and you need trained staff to do that. You need to train your staff on how to do that. I was the climate specialist from 2012 to 2021 in Bloomfield. And my role was to bring in was initially called anti-bullying policy, bring that policy in and to create a climate committee that was a district-wide committee, but we had representatives from each of our schools as well as representatives from central office to address our climate issues. We created processes and procedures so that families and students could speak up about bullying and about inappropriate, harmful, exclusionary language. And we did training in Ross Green's Lost at School, which was a precursor to the restorative practices work that's been happening. And we have also with the restorative practices, I mean, what you're focusing on is addressing very pointedly and directly the behavior that's inappropriate and creating a pathway for restoration through recognizing that this approach is diminishing to the humanity of the person you're using it against, and other optional, well, not other optional, but other ways of sharing whatever the truth is that you're trying to communicate to the person without diminishing their humanity. And restorative practices can be challenging, especially when in a school setting, faculty don't subscribe to the idea of restorative practices. So I'm not sure, I know you have a restorative practices initiative in place, and I'm not sure what the training, where people are along that continuum of adoption of those understandings. So I would need to look closely at that, because it is essential that the district adopt it, that there are standardized practices, that students have consistent information about what's acceptable and not acceptable, and things like behavioral, PBIS, positive behavioral interventions and supports, is another supporting tool for restorative practices as well. So it is about assessing where the district is and where it needs to go from there.
Thank you.
Okay, so our community is discussing screen time in schools and the need to teach technology, standards and safety, and how to address concerns about the future of AI. Could you please share your perspective?
Thank you. Absolutely. Technology should serve learning. It should not replace it, replace the interaction that you have between teacher and student. So technology should be a tool for learning, but should not replace that relationship between the learner and the teacher. I'm comfortable with technology. When I was at UConn, I was an assistant professor of educational technology. When I transitioned to the Hartford Public Schools in 2001, I was the assistant director for library media and technology, and I'm a big proponent of using technology to be more efficient and to improve performance. I trained 2,500 teachers in Hartford on level 1 technology skills when computers were first coming in. That was a while ago. But still, people still struggled with just turning the computer on. I also had the great good fortune of being able to network all of our libraries together with the city libraries in Hartford, so that a child could be at any school and call a book from any part of the city and have it delivered to them, which really expanded the options that they had for what they had access to. So I'm a big supporter of technology, and students need digital literacy, and they need to be wise consumers of what's out there, because anybody can put anything out on the internet. You really have to be a savvy judge about the quality and integrity of that information, and I think that students need a supportive learning experience around that. They need to be supported. I think that AI can support accessibility. It's for students with special needs, for students who are speakers of other languages. The translation technology is really exciting, but I also want to balance that with the concerns of privacy and replacing the incredible human brain that they have at their disposal. You know, I think people need to learn how to use their brains before they start turning to AI to answer questions for them, answer all their questions. So I think that technology and AI with clear guardrails is really important. And I think that the community really needs to decide what you're most comfortable with around the use of technology, while also keeping an eye on the future of, you know, where the technology is going and how much of the work world, the future world, will rely on the technologies that we have.
Thank you.
Thank you. Oh.
Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you. What strategies and considerations will you use to help us implement our likely upcoming state-mandated bell-to-bell phone ban?
Wow. Did you notice I don't have my phone on the table? And I wasn't sitting like this, reading my phone. You know, it's interesting. We're at such an interesting point in our human evolution with technology and that romance that we have going on. And when Yonder Pouches came out 4 years ago, my own school district did a pilot with them in the middle school. And my 8th grader at the time was very upset about this, to the point of tears. Well, near tears. It was very frustrating to him. He was very excited to have a phone, and you know, we were excited to be able to communicate with him. But they implemented this pilot, and he went through the pilot experience, and then he was interviewed by the Washington Post. He and a couple of his friends, and it was that interview that helped me understand what's happening here. The conclusion that the students drew about the cell phones in Yonder Pouches and not with them and in their faces all day was that, gosh, what happens is that we end up talking to one another. I mean, that's a beautiful thing, because when we look at our young people today, there's a lot of anxiety, And part of that anxiety comes from a lot of isolation. They were isolated during COVID and didn't have a chance to spend time with their same age peers, developing those social skills that many of us, we have and we take for granted. But our COVID kids were denied that at an important time in their development. So that exchange, unless you had brothers and sisters to argue with, you know, where do you learn to debate? Where do you learn to lovingly disagree with someone? And so our kids were really face that challenge, and the cell phones further isolate them in some ways. I mean, there's also ways to communicate with cell phones, which we also do. But families need, you know, in implementing the plan, what's important is that the district is in compliance, that the schools have a manageable process to ensure the safety and protection of any device that comes into the school, that it won't get damaged or stolen, that type of thing. So you need to watch for that. But it's really about how the school chooses to implement. And there are some really good models out there. And it's not all Yonder Pouch purchases. There are some really good, effective strategies. And today, I think it was here at JFK, the principals shared with me their process for securing cell phones and ensuring that they have bell-to-bell, no cell phones. And I think it's really healthy. It would need to, you know, however it's managed, it needs to be in compliance with the law. And we also need to assure our families that they can contact their students, you know, provide a process for that as well.
Thank you. Just a quick follow-up. What are your thoughts about implementing this policy at the high school level versus the middle school level?
I know that, oh, and I didn't say this, you know, high school, you have more advanced instruction. Some instructors like to integrate cell phones into the classroom work, and other times the cell phones are distracting students from paying attention to their teacher, right? So I think, again, that needs to be a process that is established at the high school, how they're going to implement it, as long as probably a democratic decision, so something that's discussed, and then ultimately the superintendent would make the decision based on the models and the proposals received by each school.
Thank you.
Walk us through how you will build relationships as you become part of our community. How have you bridged conflicts and divides within a school community?
I think that the strongest approach for me is to be present. To be present in schools, to be present in classrooms, to be present in the community, at community events, at gatherings, at meetings, to be accessible to members of the community, and to listen carefully. That I learned so much today, and I know there is so much to learn about what the community needs, what the schools need, what the learners need, with all the different perspectives that adults bring, that are important, that shape their experience and how they value their contribution. So I think being present, listening carefully, speaking very plainly, in accessible language so that people can have the same understanding of the same words, and then following through, doing whatever it is that, a decision is made, and this is collectively the best decision for this particular issue or situation, following through and making sure that it happens, that there's closure on that. How have you bridged conflicts and divides within a school community? So one of the things that I learned so much from was my work in Bloomfield. I had the opportunity to be in a predominantly Black and brown community, and we had crucial conversations about race. And through those conversations, it wasn't a big group. It was probably about, I think 20, 25 people, and we would come together for dinner in a structured format with a facilitator once a month. And we would have conversations about very concrete, lived examples from people's lives about what it is to be Black in America, what it is to be Latino in America, in my community, in my home, in the grocery store down the street, just very concrete examples. And it was beautiful. It was a wonderful way to get to know people, to make new friends, to find additional value and ways to celebrate people that I wasn't aware of before. And it was also interesting for them to learn about me. There weren't a lot of school staff there. There was a teacher, and there was me. And then there were community members. And so that was, opportunity for them to learn about me as a first-generation college student and as someone who never thought they would go to college because no one said you'll go to college. So finding that path for myself, that was a great experience. And so I think that there's a very high level of engagement in this community and tremendous opportunity to embrace the different cultures that are here.
What is your experience with special education? How can Northampton address special education gaps and build on existing supports, especially with concerns around transparency and trust? If you've been able to look at some of the reports on the district from Case Collaborative, if you could add any specifics from that, that would be great. If not, not a problem. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. I actually, That was a significant concern of mine when I read the reports. But I do have a background in special education. I have a master's in adults with learning disabilities. I understand the whole continuum of service that students receive at the pre-K level, the pre-K-12 level, also through the college experience. I was part of the admissions team at UConn for students with learning disabilities, and so learned all about that process. Children with special needs are still a core part of our student population, and deserve the opportunity to be a part of that. Let's see. So my district leadership work, I've worked on supervising and hiring a director of special education and ensuring that we are in compliance and we are meeting those IEP, individualized education program service needs. Some of the concerns I think came up when we talked about MTSS and Tier 1 instruction, the core instruction that's happening in the schools. I think that instructional leadership today, too, was a common theme in my conversations with principals. In fact, there wasn't a principal that I spoke to who didn't say, instructional leadership is really important to me. I want to be able to get into those classrooms and see what instruction, support my teachers and give them good feedback about their instruction. So it's essential that Tier 1 instruction be shored up. And I understand that the special education really requires strong legal attention to legal matters and legal compliance with IEPs. And I would like stronger monitoring of the service delivery of special ed services, and I imagine that, using the analytics tool, now I can't think of the name of it again, but Open Architects, thank you, OA, Open Architects, using Open Architects to communicate how well the services are being delivered to students in terms of just meeting their IEP learning goals, service delivery goals, and having a dashboard that's public-facing that speaks to this data would be very helpful. I understand that Aspen, the software that manages the IEPs, is not all that user-friendly. So I think that we need to look at how we are collecting that information about the delivery of services and compiling it and then communicating it back to the community. That level of accountability and transparency should help the service providers also understand where the gaps are and where they are not meeting the IEP requirements.
Thank you.
Martin.
Can you talk a little about two questions? What is your vision for this highly engaged district? And then how would you go about achieving that vision, both short and long term?
So my vision is, there's so much good happening in the district, especially at the high school, where I really got a chance to see some of the arts work that the students are doing and hear from the principal and the extracurriculars that the students are engaged in and the dual enrollment college courses the students are experiencing. There's so much good happening at the high school. And I think that, I don't know that the district has a portrait of a graduate, like a description of what is there?
I think it's under development, right? I know it's something that Mr. Taglieri is
Working on? So that portrait of a graduate should clearly identify what you envision, what the community envisions for each of the students graduating from the school district. And then it needs to be built out so that It accurately describes what the high school experience needs to be in order to build that graduate, but also the middle school needs to embrace that and look at how they are supporting that vision so that the students, when they enter high school, they're prepared to rise to those expectations. And your elementary schools also need to understand the critical role they play in shaping that graduate and preparing that every grade level, progressive grade level, to ensure that those students are ready for the next grade and ready to step across that graduation stage saying, yes, I meet these expectations. And my community has framed these expectations, my community, and then the educators in my schools have helped me to design my learning experiences so that I meet these expectations. And this is a highly engaged district, absolutely. So I think short term, my job would be to listen. I can't emphasize that enough, how important that is to really hear people. I learned so much today, but I imagine that I could have spent many more hours really with staff and learned so much. That's what I value about being present in the schools, is it's when you walk into that fourth grade teacher's classroom and you say hello and you know who they are and they tell you, I'm having trouble with this, or, this worked really well. So now either you have a problem to solve or you have something to celebrate, and something to share with the community. And I think there's far more good news happening in your classrooms and in your schools than you might realize, than you might hear about. So long-term, short-term, I think listen with discipline, stabilize what's most urgent, and establish routines people can count on. I want to be 100% predictable. When someone sees me coming, they know, oh, she's going to ask me, this question. She's going to ask me how my ELA instruction is going, how my adoption of the new ELA curriculum is going, or she might ask me, how is the discipline in the class, because I know that you've had some outbursts recently, or what kind of coaching are you getting? How is the coaching going? Do you have a mentor? How is that going? How is your coursework going? There's all kinds of, I want people to be able to predict what I'm going to ask them, because I'm so consistent in focusing on their success, because that means student success. And these are short times, stabilizing what's most urgent. I think that the MTSS program, we have to get that off the ground and running, and having coherent integration with our curriculum and with the, you have a wonderful district curriculum accountability document or plan, DCAP, right? I want to avoid acronyms. I think that bringing those two tools together and ensuring that all of the staff are well-versed in those resources. I understand you have the curriculum, but I understand that the DCAP, the District Curriculum Accommodation Plan, might be a separate document, so I want to understand how they can be used more closely together, and maybe even in the future, if it's appropriate, to integrate them so that those accommodations appear as a natural course of events. And you're using more of what's called UDL, or Universal Design for Learning, where your instruction is actually designed to support those learners who are going to come in with multilingual language barrier challenges, or behavior barrier challenges, or reading deficits. So if you have that universal design for learning embedded in your curriculum with those accommodation tools, it could be a powerhouse for you. So some short-term things, but the long-term is really around coherence and curriculum, good use of assessment, a comprehensive, strong, multi-tiered systems of support program, excellent special education services. I learned tonight in a community meeting something that I was aware of as an administrator, but not aware of as a parent, and really hadn't reflected deeply on. And that is the emotional challenge that you face as a parent of a child with special needs, for whom you have to fight hard for those special needs, and what that means to you. And so that was incredibly sensitizing to me, to learn from that parent, from that caregiver. So having an excellent special education program and an excellent Tier 1 instruction program is really some of the long-term vision that I have. Thank you.
Thank you.
How do you see your role in relationship to the school committee? And can you give us examples of how you have communicated with, supported, and collaborated with the school committee?
Yes. So my primary responsibility is to ensure that the school committee has clear information, that it's timely, and that there are never any surprises. That's essential. I understand the school committee governs through vision, through policy, through budget, through contracts, and that that the superintendent leads the administration and the operations of the schools. So I imagine that it would be fairly clear decision-making and I'm starting to get tired, I think.
Understandable.
But I think we're close to the end. So it would, a strong superintendent-committee relationship depends on role clarity. So I, as superintendent or the superintendent, would need to understand exactly what your expectations are, how the superintendent would be evaluated, and what kind of communication cadence you would prefer. I know in my past role, I sent a weekly report out to the school committee, letting them know what happened this week, things to celebrate, things to watch out for, but also if something happened during the day, like a lockdown because of the threat of some kind of threat, some kind of scare or something, a quick call would probably go to the board chair, right, Mayor Shara, just to say, and we would probably have a phone tree of some sort, just to bring you up to speed and to make sure that everyone on the school committee got the message about whatever the issue was. I learned that very early on in my tenure as superintendent to get that communication out there as soon as possible, especially to families. We had a number of different instances, situations. We had a bomb scare. We had weapons, claims of weapons in the school. We had a call from the FBI telling us that there were threats against the school. So all of those things, working closely with, the board chair, the school committee chair, to ensure that we have a communication plan. Sometimes it involves attorneys, getting counsel on the phone to talk through things. But then after whatever it is, whatever crisis, and I guess safety is a really big deal to me. Whatever crisis that you do have, that you have an after-action review, which is an opportunity to sit down with, say if it happened at the middle school or at the high school, you sit down with the responding team, you invite the first responders, whomever it is that showed up, and you go through minute by minute what happened during that event. And you say, here's where we were successful, here's where we could do better, and you revise your safety plan accordingly and move forward. But that's not really, well, it is in part relationship with the school committee, but let's see. I think also having norms about agenda planning, updates, how questions are handled, how emerging concerns are communicated, how community concerns move through the system, like what is the process when a community member raises a concern. Let's agree on that so that we have a plan in place, because I'm sure it will happen, right? And I would also support, onboarding new and existing members of the school committee to make sure that there's coherence. I think also an annual retreat is very helpful to talk about the vision for the school district, the previous year's successes, and what the aspirations are for the next year, and building a vision for farther out. So it's not just 1 year at a time, but it's more comprehensive and more long-term. Yes.
Great, thank you. Is there anything that you would like to share with us that you haven't had an opportunity to say today?
I do want to say that I did see a Facebook post, and someone shared my resume, but it was 6 years old, so it doesn't really have. I assumed that it didn't come from the district itself, that it might have been someone else in the community that came across my resume somewhere. So I want to say that I'm no longer assistant superintendent in Bloomfield, and you all have a current copy of my resume. And I think that this is a really beautiful community. It has such a long-standing history of human rights and democratic ideals, and I value those deeply. And it's also a very engaged community, and with engagement comes the excitement of having a positive experience and the awareness of learning from the people next door, right? When you overstep or you do something that could have been done better. So I think that it's very valuable, and there's a lot of potential here in Northampton. So I want to thank you very much for the opportunity to come and talk with you about your school district and learn.
Thank you. And as we wrap up, it's been a long day, so we just want to know if you have any questions for us before we end.
Do you love being board members?
How much time you got?
Yeah, I'm running on fumes. Yeah, but yes, it's such an important role. I was a board member in Manchester, my hometown, and do I have a question for you? Let's see. As you work through your budget challenges, how are you thinking about advocacy with the city, but also with the state, with your legislators? How are you thinking about that?
That's a great question. So I guess, there's been a lot of advocacy at the city level. We have the argument is essentially of whether or not we have the financial capacity to do more locally or not. Many people believe we do, some believe we don't. The state level, there's been a lot of advocacy as well. There's been a number of resolutions that this body has taken up or passed, from things related to charter reform to increasing various mechanisms of reimbursement rates, or looking at the Chapter 70 funding formula in Massachusetts that dictates a lot of the overall funding. I'm trying to think what year we're in now. The Chapter 70 funding was reviewed here, and the formula was changed about 8 years ago as part of the Student Opportunity Act. It didn't benefit Northampton very much at all, though it did provide much needed support to many gateway cities that are struggling a lot more than Northampton is and are a lot poorer than Northampton. So the idea that I think that a lot of people have that we're going to review the formula, which may be taken up again potentially, might not actually get us anything in the end either. So our delegation's very active. They're doing a lot of work on our behalf. They're very engaged with many of us here. I talked to one of them for an hour last week. So there's a lot of advocacy. There's a lot of lobbying, but we have, I'd also say, a geographic disadvantage where the western part of the state doesn't necessarily get the same resources and attention that the eastern part does. So there's a lot of challenges, and the short answer is there's no real help coming on the horizon. So yeah, we're struggling to try to figure out how to address that at the local level and meet our legal obligations and find the resources to build basic things like MTSS. And yeah, it's been a challenge.
I would say that was a really good synopsis. And I also want to give some credit to our students. We have remarkable students who have been fighting for more state funding. I went with a bunch of them to the State House last month, about maybe 6 weeks ago. And so we have a very engaged legislators who have been working on this. And, I'm sure you've read all of the same articles that we have about what's happening in the Commonwealth in general, and in many different communities specifically. And so I think we are at this, what I hope is a tipping point where so many communities are experiencing these significant rise in costs and deficits and inability to meet those with increased revenue. So, I am hopeful, but like Member Stein said, we've been hopeful in the past, and many of us in this room had fought for the Student Opportunity Act in the hopes that it would bring some relief to Northampton specifically, and it didn't. But some of us have been fighting for a very long time for more state funding.
Yeah, I'm going to echo what my two colleagues before me have said, and I think to add to that with regard to the state timeline, if it were to happen, we're still looking at 5 or 6 years before any changes will come through, and so how are we thinking about things? Yeah, and again, we don't know what's going to happen in the future. One of the things that I'm really thinking about is how can we be strategic in how we're approaching our budget over the period of a couple of years. How can we think about things, again, not knowing the future, but what is our ideal situation? What are the different options that we might be working with, and how to perhaps build to that if we do have the financial capacity as a city. Again, there's some discussion as to whether or not we do. So.
Yes. And to add to what they're saying, I want to kind of echo that Chapter 70 is also partially means tested. So even if the formula is revised because of our relative wealth for our area, it could go down for us. But I do think that there are other areas at the state that we could be looking into, like the insurance trust. Like, what does that look like for our health benefits? And maybe we should look about our current participation in that. And I also think that locally, we need to be fostering and promoting our schools and bringing back those kids that we are losing to charter and to private, especially at the middle school level. That's where we lose the bulk of our students. And so we need to talk to the families that are in 5th grade now and the rising 5th graders and see where are your kids going, and if they're not going to JFK, where are they going and why?
Thank you.
I want to thank you for that question, because I think it's a question that, it's a brave question in a way, so late at night, too. And I think, I think we have a lot of strengths as a body. I think they're extremely passionate and knowledgeable people on this body. We also disagree about strategy vehemently sometimes. Again, another sign of our, I think, passion for doing right by students. So we also, Member Stein, as you've probably picked up, has a tremendous amount of knowledge about the budget. And that's a great asset. It would be nice if we could agree a little more, right? And so I wonder, how, and it's not a question, I'm really just wondering, right? You don't have to answer this, but I'm sitting here reflecting and wondering how a superintendent could help with that.
Anyone else want to respond to the question?
Just a little bit, because we talked a lot about the state level, but thinking about our city level too, we currently, a lot of us here in the school committee are we're pretty new. As a body, we're majority of us this is our first term. And our city council also has quite a few people who are new to the role and figuring out what their role is as city councilors and what the role of school committee is, and really trying to understand the needs of the schools. And so really, how are we thinking about advocacy? It's really trying to work with, and I don't know how to say this, like really gently, but just like get the city council to understand that the schools are a huge infrastructure of our city, that when we talk about our needs, that we're not just kind of doing it because we just want to keep asking for more and more things. We're doing it because it's essential and vital, and we need to be legally compliant too, and really centering the most vulnerable people in our community. And I think that is a narrative that has been lost over the years, and then I think that this body and a new superintendent can really work to help our city understand what our schools really, really need, and that we're not just kind of like asking for all the things because we can ask for it.
Thank you. Thank you. I do want to come back to what I want to make sure I understand your question, because I wasn't sure if, I think what you were asking was.
So I'm sorry, that would be an additional question that no other
I'm sorry.
candidate had. So I appreciate you framing it, but this was your opportunity to ask us questions.
Yes, okay.
So I don't think that would be fair
Okay.
to other candidates, but
Thank
thank you.
you.
Though. I appreciate you wanting to come back and respond to it.
Okay. Thank you. Sure. Yes.
Okay, so again, thank you so much for your time and for participating in this process. We're very, very grateful. And so we're going to wrap up. Before we do, I just want to again remind folks about the survey. So it is on the school's website, so northamptonschools.org, and also on Parent Square. And so it closes at noon tomorrow on Wednesday. So please share your thoughts about this process and the candidates at that survey. And with that, I can ask for a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Sorry, we should. Thank you so much. Motion's been made and seconded. Motion was made by
Renika.
and seconded by. Okay,
Uh-huh.
great. Thank you.
Member Bartoli?
Yes.
Member Weissenfreund?
Yes.
Member Montgomery Tomaclo?
Yes.
Member Stein?
Yes.
Member Martin?
Yes.
Member Mahoney?
Yes.
Member Reese?
Yes.
Member Jewell?
Yep.
Member Sanders Sullivan?
Yes.
Mayor Shara?
Yes. Okay, we're adjourned. Thank you, everyone. And again, thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you.